Election preview. We're in Indiana, where immigration is an issue figuring prominently in the midterms. Right to try. President Trump signs a bill to help terminally ill patients. We have the Catholic perspective. Christian persecution, an update from Iraq on U.S. aid. And a message in black and white. We'll tell you why these Taekwondo athletes from Korea are at the Vatican. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, May 30th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump makes it official, signing a bill giving terminally ill patients the right to try experimental treatments. Critics say the measure could be dangerous, but the president says it's a basic freedom that offers hope and saves lives. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president says Americans no longer should have to travel to another country to seek life-saving medicine. He says the new right to try law would give people with deadly diseases the ability to gain access to unproven drugs without first getting permission from the FDA.
Now, with the passage of this bill, Americans will be able to seek cures right here at home, close to their family and their loved ones. We are finally giving these wonderful Americans the right to try.
President Trump says countless patients don't have the time to wait for the Food and Drug Administration to approve new medicines because the process often takes 3 to 7 years. He says this new law provides hope.
Patients with life-threatening illnesses will finally have access to experimental treatments that could improve or even cure their conditions.
The president introduced several families who fought for the law. Laura McClynn's son, Jordan, has muscular dystrophy and is often forced to use a wheelchair. She is grateful patients like her son will now have better access to treatment.
It just gives us hope that other patients who, have exhausted all other options can at least have the opportunity to ask, to have that right to ask to try something that could potentially help them.
I think that all in all, that this is a very positive step.
Dr. Barbara Golder is a Catholic bioethicist. She says the right to try helps restore the doctor-patient relationship.
I really can't emphasize that too much, because one of the things that's happened with our healthcare is that decisions are being driven by people other than doctors and patients. And I think that to the extent that we move away from that, we move away from the Catholic understanding of how healthcare is delivered.
Critics of the bipartisan bill, including many patient groups like the American Cancer Society, describe the new law as dangerous and say it could give false hope to patients. But the measure has popular grassroots support. 40 states have already approved the right of terminally ill patients to try potentially life-saving drugs. Lauren?
Mark, signing this bill fulfills one of the president's health care campaign promises, but he has not dismantled the Affordable Care Act. Has he given up that fight?
No, the president wants to keep chipping away at Obamacare. Today, he said his administration is planning on making another announcement in the next few weeks that would improve health care. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. A North Korean official arrived in New York today in an attempt to salvage next month's proposed summit with the U.S. Kim Yong-chol is one of Kim Jong-un's most trusted advisors. He is the highest-ranking official from Pyongyang to visit the U.S. in nearly 20 years. In South Korea, an American delegation is meeting on the Korean Peninsula. The White House is optimistic that the summit will take place on June 12th. One key issue in this fall's midterm elections is immigration and the fate of dreamers, immigrants brought to the U.S. illegally as children. President Trump won Indiana in 2016 by 19 points. Now their Democratic senator is fighting for re-election. Correspondent Jason Calvi is there and introduces us to a young Catholic dreamer working for the church.
Daniel Neary works for St. Monica Catholic Church in Indianapolis. There he teaches the faith to converts, families, and young people.
Seeing the grace of God, coming through their face and their glowing faces that are just so happy to be baptized.
When Daniel was 10, his parents brought him to the country illegally from Mexico. He's able to work here because of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. He's not the only dreamer guided by St. Monica's pastor.
The same thing that informs our position on abortion informs our position on immigration reform. It's that we are created in God's image and likeness, and we have certain dignity, and that is to be always guarded.
Immigration is one of many issues at play as voters here in Indiana prepare to vote this fall. In the bitter Republican primary, winner Mike Braun took a tough stance on immigration.
We must build the wall, ban sanctuary cities, and put an end to chain migration.
He's hoping to beat incumbent Senator Joe Donnelly, a Democrat trying to appeal to conservative voters.
Someone has to bridge the divide between the far left and the far right. That's where I stand, in our Hoosier common sense middle.
Donnelly voted yes on a bill to crack down on sanctuary cities, and he backed President Trump's proposal to give a pathway to citizenship to Dreamers. That's what Daniel and his wife are praying for. The Dreamers are awaiting the birth of their first child, Gabriel.
You're constantly living in that shadow, per se, of like, you don't know what's going to happen next. It's next, you don't know if next you're going to wake up and DACA is going to be out, and now you're going to be again living in the shadows.
The USA Today and Kantar Media find that this year alone, 14,000 House GOP campaign ads have touted a get tough on immigration approach. House Democrats and moderate Republicans are trying to force a House vote on immigration reform that would also protect the Dreamers. Lauren?
Jason, what do voters in the Hoosier state say they are fighting for the most?
Well, we're here at Notre Dame University, and we've been speaking to voters across the state, and one of the issues that comes up again and again is the economy. But to be honest with you, Lauren, most of the people we've been stopping haven't showed any interest in this particular race just yet. We're 6 months away from the election day still, Lauren.
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from South Bend, Indiana. Thank you, Jason. A prosecutor will drop felony charges against Missouri Republican Governor Eric Greitens. He resigned yesterday after battling allegations of a sex scandal and campaign finance impropriety.
I know, and people of good faith know, that I am not perfect. But I have not broken any laws nor committed any offense worthy of this treatment.
Greitens was charged with using a donor list from a veterans charity to run for governor. Lieutenant Governor Mike Parson will take over. The 62-year-old is a pro-life military vet and third-generation farmer. Hamas leaders in Gaza say they have agreed to a ceasefire with Israel. It follows the largest flare-up of violence between the Israelis and the Palestinian militant group since the two sides went to war in 2014. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. A senior Hamas leader says Egypt is helping mediate the fragile ceasefire, but both sides are blaming each other for the overnight exchange of missiles. The sounds of sirens near the Israel-Gaza border could be heard into the early morning hours as plumes of smoke rise above Gaza. A Hamas spokesperson says the terror group agrees to a ceasefire, but he warns if Israel fires again, they will respond. The Israeli military confirms it hit storage facilities, military compounds, and workshops across the Gaza Strip. But a senior official says Israel didn't start the fight. They acted in self-defense.
Over the past few days, Israeli children in kindergartens and schools have been attacked by hundreds of rockets and mortars from Hamas, a terror group.
The Israeli Defense Forces say more than 100 mortars and rockets were launched from Gaza on Tuesday. Most of them were intercepted. Others landed in Israel. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says Hamas was not the instigator. Abbas saying the Israelis launched an aggressive attack on the Gaza Strip with rockets and airstrikes. He says it shows Israel does not want peace. The border has been tense ever since the U.S. moved its new embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. 3 Israeli soldiers were injured in the rocket fire. There are no reports of any Palestinian casualties. The U.S. has called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting to address the attack. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is siding with Israel, blaming Hamas for shooting rockets at Israeli civilians. Lauren?
We'll see how long this ceasefire lasts. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Some members of the Taliban in Afghanistan are showing interest in peace talks. This is according to the top commander of U.S. and coalition forces in the region.
What you're seeing right now is a lot of the diplomatic activity and dialogue is occurring off the stage, and it's occurring at multiple levels. So you see mid-level, senior-level Taliban leaders engaging with Afghans.
General Nicholson says more than 50 Taliban commanders were killed last week following a U.S. rocket strike. Soldiers have been fighting the Afghan war for 17 years. Residents in Liège, Belgium, pay tribute to victims of what is now being called a deadly terror attack. 2 female police officers and a bystander were killed in yesterday's knife and shooting rampage. The suspect was shot and killed by security forces. It's been almost 1 year since Iraq ousted ISIS from Mosul, the country's second largest city. Edward Penton of the National Catholic Register recently visited Mosul and other cities. Christians are attempting to rebuild there after undergoing a genocide at the terror group's hands. 2 million Iraqis have been displaced by the war. We're joined by Edward in Rome. We have both been to Iraq to report on Christian persecution. This was your 3rd trip. What changes have you noticed? And are people moving back in?
Well, the main change, of course, Lauren, is that ISIS are no longer there, but there's a lot of devastation, particularly in Mosul. We got there for a day, and we were there going around the town. It's quite a scene of devastation. And lots of churches, of course, 45 churches were there, and most of them have been destroyed. But elsewhere, the Christians are coming back. They are slowly going back to their homes. They're being reconstructed, but it's a slow but sure process. The problem for them are 3 things, mainly jobs. They don't have jobs to go back to. The economy is quite poor. The second thing is the rule of law, which is not being held in these towns. And the third is security. And as Archbishop Warder of Erbil told me, it's not just about surviving now, it's thriving. And that's his priority.
We're holding the U.S. administration accountable. I questioned Vice President Mike Pence about aid that the U.S. has promised to persecuted Christians in Iraq. Are they seeing that money?
They're not, actually, Lauren, and this was a big disappointment that we heard from many Christians there. They heard about the promises that Trump made to prioritize aid to Iraqi Christians, to persecuted Christians, and in particular what Vice President Pence said, which was to give aid directly to the churches. None of that they're seeing, and they're saying that the old systems are still in place. So there's a considerable disappointment there from the Christians.
One of the new cardinals Pope Francis will appoint next month is Archbishop Raphael Sacco of the Chaldean Church from Iraq. What is the reaction to that among Iraqi Catholics?
Well, they're very pleased about that, and it gives them hope, as one of the Iraqi Christians told me, the rector of the seminary in Erbil, and he said that it gives them not only hope, but it also helps encourage them to be more active and dynamic, and that's important. And a third thing really important about this is that it shows that they're not forgotten, and that the West does not forget them. Often they feel that the West does forget Iraqi Christians, and this is evidence to show, at least in a small way, that they're not forgotten.
Thank you so much for that update on Iraq. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register.
Thank you, Lauren.
The head of the Office of the Doctrine of the Faith at the Vatican says only men can be ordained to the priesthood, and that rule will not change. Cardinal designate Luis Ladaria wrote an article in the Vatican newspaper about the Church's teaching on the issue. Ladaria also points to the joy of the gospel, where Pope Francis reaffirmed the teaching of an all-male priesthood. Coming up, we go to Belfast, where the next abortion battle is brewing. And what one lawmaker says is to blame for the recent spate of school shootings. A new report from the Pew Research Center says support for legal abortion in Western Europe is widespread. The international survey found Sweden had the highest level of support at 94%. Portugal had the lowest at 60%. In Ireland, in 2017, 66% of Irish adults said they supported legal abortion, and last Friday, 66% of Irish voters cast their ballots in favor of legalizing abortion. Joining us now is Tracy Harkin from EWTN Ireland. Welcome back, Tracy. Attention now shifts to Northern Ireland, one of the few places in Europe where abortion is illegal unless there is a serious risk to a woman's life or health. Could we see a similar referendum there?
Well, that's right, Lauren. The battle for life has moved north of the border. Northern Ireland is still under the jurisdiction of Westminster, although we do have a devolved parliament there. Northern Ireland has always traditionally been extremely pro-life. The leading politicians have always voted in favour of life. There has been calls both for a referendum in Northern Ireland from some quarters, and also calls for some from some Westminster MPs appealing to Theresa May to actually enforce the abortion law here. And that, of course, has been met with great resistance at the moment.
Do you think that Prime Minister Theresa May would relax Northern Ireland's abortion laws or call for a referendum to change them?
It's a hot button topic at the moment. 72% of her own party are not in favour of that. They are speaking out over the last day saying that really she needs to respect the will of the Northern Ireland people, that it's an issue of democracy, and that any liberalisation of abortion laws should be a matter for the Northern Irish people. Of course, the opposing party, the Labour MPs, are calling for an opposite implementation of, they just want complete extension of the 67 Abortion Act to Northern Ireland, which is very liberal. So it's a really big issue at the moment in media, Lauren.
Well, let's talk about the media coverage in Northern Ireland. What's it been like following Friday's vote? Are the voices of the pro-life movement still getting through, or have they been silenced by the pro-abortion majority?
Well, there are still pro-life spokespeople regularly appearing on radio and television, Lauren, especially in the north of Ireland, considering the focus now shifted to this particular jurisdiction. From a Dublin point of view, in terms of the Irish Parliament, the discussion there is now regarding the detail of the bill, and also will that legislation allow for women from Northern Ireland to access terminations in the south. So lots of discussion still going on, lots of debates and lots of media focus at this time.
What a sea change for Ireland. Tracy Harkin with EWTN Ireland, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
China is cracking down on constructing large outdoor religious statues. The directive from the United Front Work Department appears targeted mainly at followers of Buddhism and Taoism, two of China's 5 officially recognized religions. A Baptist church in South Carolina is removing a statue of Jesus. Some members of the congregation believe it is too Catholic. The 7-foot-tall sculpture, which has been inside the church for 10 years, depicts Christ with his arms outstretched. And Representative Diane Black blames recent school shootings on a decline in family values and on violent movies. The Tennessee Republican made the remarks last week while talking with pastors. She also says pornography is partly to blame. Critics say Black is ignoring the need for stronger gun laws. Up next, is free speech being curtailed on college campuses? And martial arts madness at the Vatican. Former President George H.W. Bush remains hospitalized just north of his home in Kennebunkport, Maine. His spokesman says he continues to be talkative and in good spirits. The 93-year-old was admitted after experiencing low blood pressure and fatigue. He returned to Maine last week, a month after the death of his wife, Barbara. A study by the University of California, San Francisco, is giving us the first comprehensive look at women who've undergone the increasingly popular medical procedure commonly referred to as egg freezing. 89% of the women who responded said they believed they would be glad they froze their eggs, even if they never used them, to conceive a child. 16% of the women surveyed said they had moderate to severe regret. Joining us now is Carter Sneed, a professor and director of the Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame University. Welcome to the program.
It's good to be back.
Nice to see you again. This is one of the first studies monitoring women's feelings. As we saw from the results, there's about 16% who say they're not very happy with the fact that they did it. There have been dramatic improvements in this technology. Facebook and Apple make it an employee benefit. So tell me about the church teaching on this and why they're against this process.
Yeah, I mean, to understand the church teaching on this particular concrete question, you have to situate it within the larger church's teaching on the gift of human sexuality and the good of conjugal love and the meaning of parenthood and children. So the church's teaching is rooted in understanding what human beings are and what human flourishing is, and it understands that children and parenthood are the result of a process that emerges. Children emerge as gifts from a loving conjugal union of husband and wife. That's the sort of perfected version of how families come to be. And anything that fractures that process, the unity of that process, loving husband and wife coming together and a child emerging as a gift from their loving union, is a kind of imperfect breaking apart of what should be held together. So that's why the church has grave concerns about practices that involve interposing rational mastery through biotechnology, IVF, the conception of children in processes that don't involve or go outside the marital union. And this is obviously part and parcel of that. This is an adjunct to assisted reproductive technology.
When you served as general counsel to George W. Bush, what did you advise about this, and what would you say to President Trump or the administration now?
Well, this was in its infancy when we were working on that report, which was reported in 2004. Our main concern was the massive surplus of living human embryos that are stored in freezers in the United States. In 2003, that number was 400,000. The number has increased even since then. And this was presented as an alternative possibility to delay and defer reproduction and use IVF without the creation of all these surplus embryos. It seems to me that that hasn't come to pass yet, although I haven't studied the question very carefully. It doesn't seem like it's supplanted the process of conceiving and freezing embryos, although it would certainly be a less life-destructive way of doing that. You wouldn't create human beings and store them in freezers. You'd freeze eggs instead. But as far as the use of eggs and egg freezing, anytime, and I would advise anyone who's thinking about this, anytime you try to use biotechnology to supplant natural limits, there are going to be unintended consequences and risks and disappointments.
But what about the women who say this guarantees their economic stability, meaning they can work through what would have typically been, or is for some, childbearing years in their 20s, even into their 30s?
Yeah, it's not clear to me that we have enough information to know whether this is going to be an efficacious way of conceiving and bearing children for these women. I think we're very early on. I mean, this study that you talked about is about attitudes and about feelings. I don't think it's about the efficacy of the process. People can set themselves up for grave disappointments trying to use any form of biotechnology or intervention, again, to overcome natural limits, thinking that you can sort of have it all. And that's not, of course, limited to women. It's men and women. Anytime we try to use biotechnologies in this way, we have to think carefully about the spectrum between sort of therapy, which is meant to restore wholeness and health, and enhancement, which is meant to sort of overcome natural limits in ways that cause problems and ethical concerns.
Carter Sneed, professor, director of the Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame, also on the Pontifical Academy for Life.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Taekwondo athletes from South Korea performed for Pope Francis. During today's weekly talk, the Pope thanked them for their show of peace and humanity. Athletes from North Korea were also expected, but missed the performance because of last-minute logistical problems. In a sign of peace,
a young girl released a dove. The performance was planned to open the World Taekwondo Grand Prix competition this week in Rome. We wish them well. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. We'll leave you tonight with more images from the Pope's weekly talk at the Vatican. Good night, and God bless you.